So September 13th, 1979, I was in sixth grade or about to start sixth grade. I don't know if we'd been in school a week yet, because, back then we didn't start school till after Labor Day, like civilized people. Hurricane Frederick hit, and we decided, and by we I mean my dad, because I didn't get a vote, that we were going to ride out the storm. Now, it hit on the Alabama-Mississippi line. We got to experience, in fact, the eye went right over where we were. And I remember the noise. I remember when the power went out. I remember going out in the eye when the eye came. And so we go out and we have flashlights, and there are trees everywhere. And, I'm thinking, man, it's going to take us forever to cut our way out. And I'm also thinking, and I'm going to have to carry all the wood. Daddy's going to work the chainsaw. Pat's going to be responsible for getting the wood out of the way. So I wasn't looking forward to that. But it was incredible. And it did. It took almost all of the next day just to cut a path on the road so you could get out. And it wasn't just us, my uncle and other people that lived on the road, but there were trees everywhere. In fact, I remember during the storm, during the eye of the storm, they were looking around going, man, we're just fortunate none of these trees were close enough to the house, and them even with a flashlight looking, going, you think we could cut this one particular tree down before before the storm comes back, because it is in danger. And, and I'm thinking, well, that's cool. We're just going to go out in the middle of a storm and cut a tree down. We didn't, because they determined, well, the wind's going to come from a different direction, so we should be okay. And then we went back inside, and they had been talking so much about the eye wall. I'm like, well, I got to stay up for that, because, that's supposed to be awesome. And I wasn't paying attention the last time, so now I'm going to be paying attention. And it was just a really bad storm. And then eventually I went to bed, and there was a bush that kept hitting the window of where I was sleeping. And I just kept thinking, that's going to break the window, and then I'm going to get wet, So I don't remember a whole lot else about sixth grade. I remember that we didn't start school for about a month, maybe a little more, that my dad got a hydraulic lift on his truck, built some sides and made it into a dump truck, and the Mobile County paid $25 a load. So we spent about a month going and just cutting limbs and loading them up and then taking them to the dump, and you get tickets and then you cash them in. And that's what I did. I mean, that's just what we did. We got up early, went and got as many loads as we possibly could, because they were paying $25 a load. And then after that, I went to school, I guess. And at some point, I moved into seventh grade. I don't remember a whole lot about sixth grade, but I remember that. I remember driving through a hurricane. I was coming back from Texas. I was a senior. So I was 17. My parents had let me drive to Texas to see a friend that had moved. And then I was driving back, and I didn't check the weather because, come on, I'm 17. I'm not going to check the weather. And I ended up driving through a hurricane. And at times it was scary. Like, this is crazy. I've never been in a thunderstorm like this. And at times I pull over, and there's things on the road, and I'm just like, man, and I'm weaving around. But I drive all the way, and I finally get home, and my dad's like, you're an idiot. Like, what are you doing? And I'm going, yeah, it's a bad storm. It's like, yeah, it's a hurricane, you doofus. I remember that. I remember there's one little stretch, and, obviously the whole trip wasn't through that. It was just, it really wasn't that far actually in the hurricane. But I remember one stretch where there was like some power lines on the road, and I'm going, man, power lines. And I'm driving around them, like, never occurring to me. Like, this is the worst storm ever. Like, So I remember then I got caught in a blizzard, and that was not smart. We had taken a group of youth to Winter Park, Colorado. We did that every year. We had a ski camp, so we would go. And in fact, that's where, before Chris Tomlin became Chris Tomlin, he was our worship leader 2 years at ski camp. And they're like, hey, there's this kid in Texas A&M University, and he's pretty good with a guitar, and he can sing. And it's like, well, we need a guitar player. Why don't you invite him? And, little did we know. So we had Chris Tomlin 2 years, but one of the years, one of our youth's grandparent died, so I drove them down to Denver. And who checks the weather? Why would you do that? I mean, it was pretty when I left. So I start driving back up to Winter Park, and it becomes legit blizzard. I can't move, and I'm going, well, I guess I'm spending the night here because I don't know where the road is. Like, I can't tell where the road is. I can tell where there's one side of the mountain here, and I can tell there's another side here, but I can't tell where the road is. And so I just am like, I can't move. I'm just stuck. And so about 30 minutes later, I'm just sitting there thinking, well, this is going to be cold. I probably should have prepared better. This wasn't very smart. And I see lights, and they are flying, and this snowplow comes, and he throws it all over me, and I'm thinking, no, thank you. I can't get out now, probably. And I just decide I nail the gas, and I'm like, I'm getting out of here no matter what, and it's barely moving, and I'm just like, come on, baby, you can do it. And I somehow finally get out, and the Lord was gracious, and I followed the snowplow the rest of the way. Very grateful that I didn't have to spend the night there. I knew somebody. I mean, it was a road. Somebody was going to find me the next day. It's just going to be miserable for a little while. I bet you have stories like that. I bet you have a lot of stories like that. We don't tell stories about, there was this one time when I was 10 and I walked out and it was a pretty day, nice breeze, clouds. We don't tell those stories. We can remember those days because we've seen them a bunch. Those aren't the stories we tell. Those aren't the things that implant in our mind. It's the stories of the extreme weather that we've experienced. Because that's significant. That makes a mark on us. It's an event. And so we come to a hurricane that Paul and his companions go through in a shipwreck. That's a story you tell. So whenever we come to Scripture, particularly a narrative like Acts, I often think, Lord, why is this in there? And this one, I didn't really have to ask the question. If you go through a hurricane on a boat and there's a shipwreck and you guys have to swim to shore to make it, you tell that story. I mean, Luke may not have had it in there. He may have just initially went, oh yeah, we had a shipwreck, and then few weeks later we were in Rome. And his buddies are going, dude, we were in a hurricane on a ship for 2 weeks. You got to tell that story. Because you got to, right? I mean, you have to tell that story. If you're sitting around with your friends and they're like, oh yeah, one time it rained real hard, and you're going, yeah, I was on a boat in a hurricane and we sank. Like, you tell that. So I think Luke put this story in there because you have to. You just have to. You cannot write Acts and not include that because it's too cool. I think also the Lord inspired it because it teaches us, it shows us that God is sovereign and that He would accomplish His purpose and His favor on Paul. So we're going to read Acts 27. Well, Abby Culver is going to read Acts 27, and it'll be up there if you want to read silently. But I've asked Abby to come up and read this. I asked her after the first song, so she couldn't say no. Now, I have it printed here. If you want to read that, you can do that. But I have a hard time reading a lot. My eyes start going crazy. So if it's in bold, is that large enough? Can you see that? Okay. So if it's in bold, that it is, don't even worry about these comments. Just keep going. And then you can just keep going this way.
It's all good. I'll just read this.
Okay. So Abby is going to read. We're going to get her used to doing this. She's going to do this regularly, and then eventually we'll get her to do it in a British accent.
Your wife already offered to pay me $5.
Oh, you know what?
But I'm not going to do it.
I mean, I'm willing to half that. if you'll do it in a British accent.
It's fine.
Okay, well, thank
All
you
of
for
Acts
reading it.
27.
Read all of Acts 27 for all of us. Thank you. I'm going to step out of your way.
Sure.
And when it was decided that we should sail for Italy, they delivered Paul and some other prisoners to a centurion of the Augustan cohort named Julius. And embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. The next day we put in at Sidon, and Julius treated Paul kindly and gave him leave to go to his friends and be cared for. And putting out to sea from there, we sailed under the lee of Cyprus, because the winds were against us. And when we had sailed across the open sea along the coast of Cilicia and Pamphylia, we came to Myra in Lycia. There the centurion found a ship of Alexandria sailing for Italy and put us on board. We sailed slowly for a number of days and arrived with difficulty off Cnidus. And as the wind did not allow us to go further, we sailed under the lee of Crete off Salmon. Coasting along it with difficulty, we came to a place called Fair Havens, near which was the city of Lycia. Since much time had passed and the voyage was now dangerous because even the fast was already over, Paul advised them, saying, "Sirs, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo in the ship, but also of our lives." But the centurion paid more attention to the pilot and to the owner of the ship than to what Paul said. And because the harbor was not suitable to spend the winter in, the majority decided to put out to sea from there, on the chance that somehow they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, facing both southwest and northwest, and spend the winter there. Now when the south wind blew gently, supposing that they had obtained their purpose, they weighed anchor and sailed along Crete close to the shore. But soon a tempestuous wind called the northeaster struck down from the land. And when the ship was caught and could not face the wind, we gave way to it and were driven along. Running under the lee of a small island called Cauda, we managed with difficulty to secure the ship's boat. After hoisting it up, they used supports to undergird the ship. Then, fearing that they would run aground on the Syrtis, they lowered the gear and thus were driven along. Since we were violently storm-tossed, they began the next day to jettison the cargo. And on the third day, they drew the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. When neither sun nor stars appeared for many days and no small tempest lay on us, all hope of our being saved was at last abandoned. Since they had been without food for a long time, Paul stood up among them and said, "Men, you should have listened to me and not have set sail from Crete and incurred this injury and loss. Yet now I urge you to take heart, for there will be no loss of life among you, but only of the ship. For this very night there stood before me an angel of the God to whom I belong and to whom I worship. And he said, 'Do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those that sail with you. So take heart, men, for I have faith in God that it will be exactly as I have told. But we must run aground on some island.' When the 14th night had come, as we were being driven across the Adriatic Sea about midnight, the sailors suspected that they were nearing land. So they took a sounding and found 20 fathoms. A little further on, they took a sounding again and found 15 fathoms. And fearing that we might run on the rocks, they let down 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for day to come. And as the sailors were seeking to escape from the ship and had lowered the ship's boat into the sea under pretense of laying out anchors from the bow, Paul said to the centurions and the soldiers, 'Unless these men stay in the ship, you cannot be saved.' Then the soldiers cut away the ropes of the ship's boat and let it go. As day was about to dawn, Paul urged them all to take food, saying, 'Today is the 14th day that you've continued in suspense and without food, having taken nothing. Therefore, I urge you to take some food, for it will give you strength, and not a hair is to perish from the head of any of you.' And when he had said these things, he took bread, and giving thanks to God in the presence of all, he broke it and began to eat. Then they all were encouraged and ate some food themselves. We were in all 276 persons in the ship. And when they had eaten enough, they lightened the ship, throwing out the wheat into the sea. Now when it was day, they did not recognize the land, but they noticed a bay with a beach on which they had planned, if possible, to run the ship ashore. So they cast off the anchors and left them in the sea, at the same time loosening the ropes that tied the rudders. Then hoisting the foresail to the wind, they made for the beach. But striking a reef, they ran the vessel aground. The bow stuck and remained immovable, and the stern was being broken up by the surf. The soldiers' plan was to kill the prisoners, lest any should swim away and escape. But the centurion, wishing to save Paul, kept them from carrying out their plan. He ordered those who could swim to jump overboard first and make for the land, and rest on planks or on pieces of the ship. And so it was that all were brought safely to land.
Very well done. Thank you. So we often use the metaphor of storms to describe the turmoil and troubles that come into our life. And that's a very appropriate metaphor. In fact, it's so appropriate that when I basically said that in the first sermon is when the storm hit. Like there was thunder and it was crazy. And I was like, well, that's cool. But we use that metaphor. It makes perfect sense. That's what it feels like. When trouble hits, it feels like a storm. It feels like chaos. It feels like we're being tossed to and fro, and we don't have any control over it. That we are literally in a boat, and it's just being tossed back and forth. And so because of that, and that's a very appropriate metaphor, often when we come to this passage, then we go, well, this teaches us about the storms of our life. And I think we can learn that. We have to be careful whenever we are doing any kind of allegory like that, because it's not a one-for-one. This wasn't designed to teach us just like, hey, we put the storm story in there so you could go, oh, it's like storms of life and it's a one-for-one allegory type thing. I believe that we can learn wisdom from this passage. I don't think the purpose of this passage is for that. I don't think the purpose is to say, oh, when you're going through storms of life, like we put this in and Paul went through the storm so you would understand the storms that you go through. And so I say that because we are going to talk about storms in our life. But I want you to understand, we want to understand the wisdom that comes from here without going too far with the allegory. And without thinking, oh, this was so that we would learn about storms. No, I think this happened in real life, and what we see is that God's plan cannot be thwarted. But I think we can learn about storms in our life. So they get on this Alexandrian freighter. Now, these freighters were about 180 feet long, about 45 feet wide. The draft was about 45 feet, 43 feet. And they held up to 600 people. And they were common. They were the largest freighters on the Mediterranean, but they were very common for that day. Mainly what they did is they would bring grain, particularly from Egypt, up into Greece and that area. Because there was actually a very thriving trade multinational trade thing. Well, it was all in Rome, but there was a thriving trade industry going on. So these things were, these ports and these ships were all over the place. And the way it would work is it opened up, they said when it decided that we should sail for Italy. So wherever you were in an area, there would be prisoners that would need to go to Rome. Like Paul, they appealed to Caesar or for whatever reason. And you're not going to spend the money to send one prisoner from Caesarea to Rome. So they would wait until there was enough in the area that they go, this is worth a Roman cohort and the money to send them all. And so you just wait, whenever it was. And so now it's summer and they go, okay, we got enough. So Julius and his soldiers, y'all are going to take the prisoners. And they don't have a Roman ship. So the idea is we've got guards and we just book passages and we bounce along until we can get to Italy and then we can march. And we can march the prisoners. And that's what's happening. Makes perfect sense. And the problem is when they leave Caesarea to go north to Sidon and then to get under. So let's pull the map up, and we're just going to leave the map up for the rest of the time. So you see that they go north, and they get under the Asia Minor there. Typically what would happen is they would then sail right across the Aegean Sea over to Greece, and then you would travel over, or you'd get a boat from there, and then you'd go across the Adriatic Sea over to Italy. So they would be just little jaunts. The reason they have to turn south and go under Crete is, and Luke tells us this, the wind was fighting them. It was a wind coming from the north, so they couldn't go across. So their plan evidently is, well, let's don't fight the wind. We'll go down to Crete, and then we'll have Crete protecting us, and we'll sail along the southern coast of Crete, and then they were going to winter there. Makes perfect sense. I mean, you go, okay, that's probably something that was very common for them to do. And this was just an extremely strong wind. But that's why they take that route. And throughout these kind of trips, you're always having to make various decisions. And you make the best decisions that you can. And these make sense. So if we can winter in Crete, then when the winter gets through, we're halfway through the journey. And so, because they're going to get on the western end of Crete, then, they're halfway through the journey, and it won't take as long, and they get into Rome, a few months behind schedule, but that's reasonable. And they get to Fairhaven. So even when they get under Crete, Luke says there was still rough, like they just were having a hard time making progress. So they get to Fairhaven. Now they decide they're going to go to Phoenix. Phoenix, can you see the R on the word Crete? Yes? Okay, well, I can't see it from back there. So anyway, you see R so as the R is coming off the island, as the loop is coming around and coming off, that's about where Phoenix is, roughly. Phoenix is on the western side, and it has a northwest facing, and a southwest facing harbor. And that's advantageous to winter in because you can actually adjust based on how the weather is. And Phoenix is a popular place to winter, so it is prepared and set up to handle people wintering there, people taking shelter for the winter. Paul tells them in verse 10, I perceive that the voyage will be with injury and much loss, not only of the cargo and the ship, but also of our lives. He's talking about the journey from Fairhaven to the end of Crete. Just that little bit. Because that's where he says it. I think this is going to be bad. Or wait, no, he's talking about the journey from Cnidus down, right? Isn't that where we picked that up? I didn't put it in my notes. They've had such a hard time going under Asia Minor that he's going, guys, I think this is a bad idea. I think maybe we shouldn't be traveling this way. And they decide, well, let's go for it. So what do we learn from all this? They get into the hurricane. They're in it for 14 days. They can't see the sun or the stars, so they can't navigate. They throw over their cargo. They throw over their tackle. They eventually will cut the anchors. Like, they're just trying to stay alive. So what can we learn from this journey that actually can apply to our lives? And there are three things that I want us to see here. The first is, for those who are taking notes, wow, there were a lot of comments that I'm going to skip. The first is, You need a travel companion through life, especially in the storms. You need a travel companion through the storms then. We are not made to go through life alone. We're just not made that way. We're not made, and particularly in the kingdom of God. Even Jesus, when he sent them out two by two. We are not made to live a life with Christ alone. We're not made to go through hard times alone. We need a travel companion. And Paul always had travel companions. Paul had Luke, as we see throughout Acts when he's saying we, and we went there, and we went there. And he had Aristarchus. So in verse 2 of this chapter, it says, and embarking in a ship of Adramyttium, I don't know, which was about to sail to the ports along the coast of Asia, we put to sea, accompanied by Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica. So Luke is saying, Paul and I and Aristarchus, we were together. We know Aristarchus. We've met him already. Back in Acts 19, there was the riot of Ephesus. And if you'll remember, so the silversmiths were really worried, like, hey, Paul, or they're going, hey, Paul's preaching, our trade is going to fall into ill repute, and we're going to lose money, and also the temple of Artemis, which the whole world worships, is going to, be destroyed or whatever. And that gets everybody riled up, and then there's just confusion, and everybody in the city's riled up, and there's a riot in Ephesus, and they storm into a theater, and they drag with them Gaius and Aristarchus. In fact, in chapter 19 of Acts, it says, so the city was filled with the confusion, and they rushed together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians, who were Paul's companions in travel. Aristarchus then continues to be Paul's companion in travel all the way to Jerusalem, to Caesarea, and now to Rome. In fact, Paul is going to Rome, and he's going to be imprisoned in Rome. In this first imprisonment, this isn't his only, he's going to be imprisoned in Rome again. In his first imprisonment in Rome, Paul writes Colossians. And in Colossians 4:10, Paul writes this, Aristarchus, my fellow prisoner, greets you, and Mark, the cousin of Barnabas, concerning whom you have received instructions. If he comes to you, welcome him. So we know Aristarchus is going to go all the way to Rome and be a prisoner with Paul in Rome when he writes Colossians. So he was a travel companion of Paul while he was on his missionary journeys, at least his third, we know for sure, or actually maybe even his second. And he's all the way with him to when he's arrested in Jerusalem and on this trip to Rome and in Rome. He was a loyal friend. We often think about Paul in prison, and we think of Paul by himself. Oh, Paul, and prisons were awful. They were even worse than, I think prison is awful now, what little I know about it. Theirs were even worse. And we often will think in our mind, well, Paul was by himself in prison suffering for the gospel. And he wasn't. There was always somebody with Paul. So there are two theories on how is it that Luke and Aristarchus are with Paul when he's in prison here in Caesarea and then in Rome. And there are two theories. Number one, they said that they were Paul's slaves. And if they say they're Paul's slaves, then by Roman law, they have to stay with Paul. But the more likely and more popular theory is simply they paid their way. They simply paid their way. Hey, Paul's in prison, won't cost us anything. We're going to go be in prison with him. We'll pay our way. And that's the more common belief, that they just paid their way. This is our brother. He's not going to be in prison by himself. No expense to you. We're going to be with him. That's a friend. That's a partner. And we all need those kind of friends. In a literal storm, when physical life is in danger, to have those friends with you that are just saying, look, whatever, if we're going to be shipwrecked, then we're going to be shipwrecked. Because they were not arrested. They could have said at Fair Havens, and Paul could have said, dudes, look, I think it's a bad idea. Y'all just stay here. No. Paul, we go where you go. We're with you. And we need friends like that. And here's I'm going to make now some sub-points under that. So I want to take a few minutes and I want to talk about having friends like that. The first question is, do you know that you need friends like that? And I'm particularly asking the dudes. Because men often aren't great at friendships, and particularly not deep friendships. And there may be women that are that way. I mean, people are people, but men tend more that way. And men, more than women, seem to buy a myth that's a Western myth. And it is a myth, and that is the idea of the self-made man. So Malcolm Gladwell, who's not a Christian, he's just a liberal socialist, sociologist. I was calling him a socialist. I don't think he's a socialist. A sociologist. He wrote a book called Outliers. And it's a little book, it's a quick read, but it's really interesting. But here's what he proved. Here's his whole point. We believe that people just somehow make themselves successful. And that there are these prodigies that are born. And somehow they're so unique that they just become successful by the very sheer power of their will and their talent. So he takes numerous areas and people. And he goes, so let's look at music. And he goes with Mozart. And he goes, supposedly Mozart wrote Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star when he was 4. It's like, well, technically, he was playing on his piano. His dad, who also was a music teacher, he's going, according to this biography, this happened. And then the legend began to grow. And he says, no, here's the way success works. Here's our formula. Based on this formula, then he should not have had his first true masterpiece until he was 20 years old. And he goes, this writer says his first true masterpiece was written at this time. It was written at this time. Oh, look, he was 20 years old. Nobody is such a unique talent that they just, by the sheer power of their will and their talent, just rise up. And he does this with everything. Computer, technology, science. He goes through this person. I'm saying these things are true, and they're true of these talented people. And one of the things he's saying is true is nobody on their own just becomes a massive success. Because it just doesn't happen. There's no evidence of it happening. Somebody helps them. There's somebody that's helping them. And he gives an example of the smartest guy who some believe is the smartest guy that's ever lived in the United States. And I wish I could remember his name. I was trying to find my book, Outliers, this week. I loaned it to somebody, maybe one of you. I'd like it back, you thief. You're only a thief if you keep it. If you return it, then you're not a thief. But you haven't returned it yet, so... No, I don't know. I don't even remember who I loaned it to, but I was having this conversation with someone, and I was like, you need to read this. I said, it's not Christian or anything, but you just need to read it, because he makes the point of, we need help. And I said, there's a whole chapter there on a guy who was born in Montana, who wrote a theory of the universe in the 8th grade. There are scientists now who will say, this guy's probably the smartest guy he's alive, who lives in the United States. And he goes on, like, he did this, he did that, he did this. These scientists are all going, yeah, he never got a degree, and he's just, like, he is probably the smartest guy. And he goes, at the time of writing this book, I believe he was a bouncer in a bar. He had been a hand on a fishing boat, and he had struggled his whole life. And he basically makes the point. Here's his story. And his story was basically he had a dad who didn't help him, and he developed this, I'm smarter than everybody. And he said, and he just was. And so I just do it on my own. And he goes, and as a result, he never made it. And then he picks one of the scientists on the Manhattan Project. And he goes, this guy. And he goes, scientifically, this guy's very average. And he goes through, he goes, there's nothing special about him, but people will refer to him because he was on the Manhattan Project. Why? These people, and these people campaigned for him to be on that project, and he got on it. Even though other scientists were going, he's not that great. Why is he? He's got people pushing and helping him. And that's his big point, among many, is like there are no self-made people in the world that didn't have help from somebody. Steve Jobs or Wozniacki or whatever you say his name, the great and powerful was, he talks about Bill Gates. And he goes, this young man had a mom who formed a computer club because she saw in her son a natural talent and love. And so she did all this work. And he's going, he did this many hours of programming before this technology was developed. But when it was developed, he was ready. And his whole point in all of this is there are certain factors that come with making it through life and maximizing your potential. And one of those factors is you have to have other people in your life to help you along the way. You just have to. And I'm reading it going, isn't that what the Bible teaches us? That we're not made to be alone? Like, isn't the world figuring out what we as Christians should already know? And if we're going to make it through storms, we have to have somebody with us. We have to. So the first question is men, do you know that? I mean, all of you, but particularly men. Do you understand that there are going to be times when times are good, you don't need a lot of other men. When times are good, you enjoy the friendship and hanging out, but you don't need those deep connections. But there are times life comes along and it cuts your legs out from under you, and you need those friendships. You need somebody. You need those deep friends. Your wife cannot carry that burden for you, and you're too much. Because if you're going through it, she's going through it. And often men will say, well, I've got my wife. And I'm going, good. It's great to have an amazing wife. But how unfair is it for her to be going through it and you to be going through it and you going, all I need is her. And she's like, I'm going through this too. Like, I need you and we're going to need each other, but we also need others. So the first question is, do you know you need a traveling companion that will be that kind of friend? The second thing is how do we get them? How do we get how do we get a friend that goes, hey, you're going to prison, I'm going to pay my way so I can be in prison with you? How do we get that kind of friend? Or I'm going to say that I'm your slave so that I'll be in prison. It's like, well, you know, if you're a slave, they're going to treat you worse than they treat me. I don't care. You're not going to be in prison by yourself. How do we get that kind of friend? The first thing is don't wait until the storm comes to make that kind of friend. I will see people at church, and man, I got to hurry. I'll see people at church who will come to church, and they'll be like, the storm has suddenly hit. Now I need these kind of friendships. And the church will try to love them, and the church will try to be friends, but they're asking for a depth of friendship that just cannot be faked. They're going, I haven't done anything to make these kind of friends. I haven't done anything to pursue these kind of friends. But now I'm saying, you guys be that kind of friend. And people can go, well, we will try to love you and help you, but honestly, we don't know you that well. We'll do what we can. We want to help. So you don't wait until the storm to make those kind of friends. The second thing is, be that kind of friend. You make the kind of friend that will be on the ship with you in a storm because you've been that kind of friend. Are you that kind of friend? Or are you the kind of friend that goes, oh, yeah, it was fun, I enjoyed it, you're now too hard, and walk away? Also, look for those kind of friends. These kind of friends are more than just people who we enjoy. It is easy to enjoy a person's personality and enjoy hanging out with them when times are good. But these kind of friends are those people with the depth of character and faith in God who can and will sit in prison with you. And you know that. You have friends that you can look at, and you know them. You know their depth. You know their depth. You know the depth of their faith. You know the depth of their character. And you know they're the kind of person that will get on the ship with me in the storm, because that's who they are. And that's how they treat their friends. They may not do it for everybody, but if you're one of their people, they do it for you. And then there are other friends that you go, they will unless it gets too rocky, and they're not the kind of person that's going to stay there. It's going to get too hard. I have a friend, and we have a mutual friend, and their friendship broke. The mutual friend, I see about once a year, just because of life. And I was asking him about it, and he goes, man, one day he looked at me, and he was telling me what was going on in his life. And he said, he looked at me and he said, you know what, just being your friend is exhausting. And he's like, yeah, man, I'm really sorry. And he goes, no, I'm saying, we don't need to continue this. It's exhausting. And he's like, man, I'm just looking at him going, are you kidding me? I was with you through da-da-da-da-da-da. And now I need you, and you're like, it's just hard. I got a lot going on. I'm busy. I've got a family. You're draining me. All the things people say. And I'm going, yeah, I could see that. He's like, man, what? I'm going, dude, there's just sometimes there are people you just know. He's not a friend for the storm. It's like, I can enjoy him, and when I see him, it's fun, but he's not that kind of friend. Like, you just got to know that. That's why I don't go out of my way to invest more in that friendship. He's not that kind of friend. So be and find an Aristarchus. So the second point, there's two more, but that was the 90% of it. The other two, it'll be quick because I know you're stressing. The second thing that I've mentioned a couple times is nothing thwarts God's plan, not even a hurricane. How often did Luke refer here to the fact that, Paul, you have to go to Rome? That was when Paul was warned not to go to Jerusalem. And they're saying, Paul, they're going to tie you up and everything. And it's like, okay, the Lord told me, yes, the Lord told me that. I confirmed with you that's going to happen. The Lord then also told him, you have to testify of me in Rome. So you have to go to Rome. So a hurricane is not going to stop it. Nothing towards the plan of God. Number 3, and this one will take a little bit longer, and I'll hurry. Whether the situation was their fault or not, the answer was found in going with God, which in this case was going with God's man Paul. Now, I said whether it was their fault or not. So Paul said it was unwise. They should not have kept sailing. He said it was unwise. So in that case, it would be, well, it was their fault. They didn't listen to wisdom. They didn't listen to the wisdom of Paul. Paul said, guys, I perceive this is dangerous. We shouldn't do it. So in that case, the shipwreck is their fault because they were unwise. And there are times that we find ourselves in situations that are storms because we're unwise. We made a series of unwise decisions, not thinking through the potential consequences. And so in that case, it's their fault. And Paul said, you should have listened to me. And so if we find ourselves in a storm, a literal storm or a figurative storm, and our series of decisions led us there, which is often the case, the answer is still turn to God. It's still turn to God. But what if it's not their fault? What if everything they did was reasonable? Let's pull up the map again. Everything they did was reasonable. So they have gotten to Fairhaven there on the south part of Crete. They're wanting to go, a couple of 100 miles or so along the shore to get to Phoenix. Paul says, guys, I perceive that we're going to lose the cargo, the ship, and our lives. So Paul is not saying the Lord has showed me that that this is going to happen. He's just saying, it seems like it's a bad idea. I think we're all going to die. So the centurion, because he's the highest ranking guy, goes to the captain of the ship. You've sailed these waters a bunch. What do you think? He goes to the owner of the ship. This is your livelihood. You're not going to be careless with this. What do you think? And then he goes to the majority. You all heard what these guys say, and you've heard what Paul said. What do you think we should do? And they're looking around at Fairhaven going, well, I don't think we should winter here. Maybe there was no place to sleep. Maybe they were like, we'll have to sleep on the boat, and that just seems unwise to us. I don't know, but they looked around and went, this is not suitable for us to stay the winter here. And so let's go we're going to stay south of the land. Let's go along the shore and let's get to Phoenix that is suitable. The vote is not, should we sail across the sea all the way over to Sicily? The vote is just, should we sail from Fairhaven over to the R? South of the land, blocking the wind. Yes, let's do it. And then there's a calm breeze. Hey guys, this was a good decision. And the wind comes. See, I think everything they did was reasonable. Makes perfect sense to me. Because here's the thing. I want to be a person that tries to give people godly wisdom. But some of you are pilots. And if we take a trip and it's super bumpy and I get motion sickness and I'm throwing up and I'm like, ah, and it's like sometimes we're dropping. I don't know what a big drop is in an airplane, so if this is silly, go with me. But it feels like we drop 100 feet in turbulence. It's just that bad. And I'm just like, whoa. And then we land to fill up and you go, hey, we're about halfway there. I think we should keep going. Or we need to go, it's just 30 more miles or whatever. And I'm going, guys, it feels like we're going to die. It does. And the pilot goes, we're not going to die. We're going to be okay. It's rough, but we're going to be okay. And the guy who owns the plane's like, yeah, I've flown this route a ton of times. It's going to be okay. Here's why. We're going to fly low or whatever. Or we're going to fly high, whichever you're supposed to do. And I'm going, it just still feels like we're going to die. I don't think we should. And then we crash later. I'm going to go, you guys should have listened to me. But if I'm part of the group making the decision, I'm going to go, Pat, no offense. I know you've flown in an airplane before, but these guys are the pilots and they own the plane and they've flown this before. I'm going to go with them. That just makes sense. And we're not talking about going across the open sea. They've explained why this makes sense. I don't think Paul is speaking with great godly wisdom here. I don't think it's the Lord telling him, because the Lord later on would tell him, nobody's going to die. So in that case, it seems to me they've made reasonable decisions. The wind pushes them away from the land, and they fight the wind until they realize they can't. And that's when they let go. But they're fighting, trying to get back to the land. So whether your decisions are wise or unwise. So if you're in the storm because you caused it, or you're in the storm making the very best decision you could, and you just still ended up in the storm, the answer's the same. Turn to God. And that was the answer for them. They wanted to kill prisoners. Some sailors wanted to escape. They got desperate. And it was Paul constantly encouraging them to go, no, eat, get your strength back. He says they were under suspense. Do you know what he's saying? For however many days, you've been in fight or flight mode. Some of you have been on deployments, you understand. Right now, we would call it PTSD. Like you've been in this fight or flight, adrenaline is super high. You've been in suspense. Are we going to live or are we going to die? That has been your life 24 hours a day for the last 2 weeks. You need to eat some food. They needed someone with them to go, here is God. Here's wisdom. Eat some food. Be encouraged. So whether it's a literal storm or whether it's a figurative storm of life, we need a companion. We can trust the sovereignty of God. And we should repent if we caused it. But whether we are the reason of the storm or whether it's just we're doing the best we can and the storm hits, either way, the answer is turn to God. And we got to have a companion that's going to encourage us to turn to God. Okay? So we're going to pray. Andy's got to say a few words, and then we'll get out of here. Lord God, please help us to turn to you. Help us to be that kind of friend now. There are people around us who are in storms. Help us to be the kind of friend that's going to be on the ship and in the prison and travel with them through life. Help us to be that kind of friend. And God, we pray that you would give us those kind of friends. In your name we pray, Lord Jesus. Amen.